Hi, I'm Laura D. Pusey, and I'm starting this video with a disclaimer. I've been toying with the creation of a video like this for quite some time. On this subject, my mind swings in many directions, and although I've touched upon it in my book, Tapestries of Grief, I don't have a final conclusion. I think I am an investigator of death. And I guess this is an ongoing discussion that needs to be spoken about more honestly and openly. My thoughts are my own and are not shared with the intention of swaying the thoughts or actions of others. My thoughts are compounded by observations that are clear for everyone to see and link. This is simply my interpretation of what I see. I'm trying to work it out in my mind. Now, recently, there's been a lot of negative press in the American media about Jada Pinkett and what is thought to be her portrayal of Cleopatra. The uproar is based on the fact that she has dared to depict Cleopatra as a Black woman. Now, after watching the series, I have to give her props. Not only was the series informative and factual, it brought up many subjects that are so regularly overlooked today. One of the most powerful for me came in the last episode. Now, I didn't know much about the life of Cleopatra. Based on the previous representations, I had no need to look into her life. She was a white lady, she was ancient, and she was long dead. However, as I grow more into death, I understand the relevance that she has on my life and my journey towards overstanding death. So, when the last pharaoh, which is what she was, when she had done all that she could to save the Ptolemaic Empire and protect her children, she chose to end her life by suicide. She was prepared to sacrifice her life for those she loved the most. So we are told in the series that she took a poison that she knew would bring an end to her life without pain or distortion to her body. In doing so, she took the power away from Octavian, who sought to parade her and humiliate her as a show of his strength and triumph over the overthrowing of Egypt and the gaining of control over Rome. Cleopatra was going to die at Octavian's hand. So she decided that she would take back the power. She decided when and how, where, and with whom she would die. One of the scholars in the series noted that historically, the most bravest thing for a Roman person to do at that time and in that situation was to die by suicide. That was the way to maintain your dignity and your valor in the face of death. And this is how Cleopatra's lover, Mark Antony, also ended his life. If you look at literature over the ages and think of people, authors like Shakespeare, he used suicide for his characters as a way of portraying defiance, despair, love, and honor. And certainly, when it comes to the Egyptians in the second millennium, they didn't see suicide as a violation of religious or legal codes. For them, it may have been viewed more as a desirable option for a tranquil death, and maybe also a tranquil afterlife. So, I am naturally drawn toward the narrative of dying on one's own terms and dying with power. rmg.co.uk, that's the Royal Museums Greenwich, explains that the transatlantic slave trade facilitated the forced migration of millions of African people via ships crossing the Atlantic. And during those journeys, thousands of enslaved African people attempted to end their lives. They did so for many reasons. The journey was long and traumatic. They were subjected to beatings, rapes, and torture. Perhaps there was a hope that death would take them home because they knew that whatever awaited them couldn't possibly be a life of calm, happiness, or prosperity. Indeed, the prosperity was in the hands of those who owned the ships. And each loss of life reduced the voyage's profits. And so the loss of cargo was obviously frowned upon and something that was guarded against. I'll repeat that. Because those enslaved were classed as cargo, cattle, chattel. And any loss of cargo was viewed upon as a terrible thing because it reduced the value of the cargo. The crew then had the responsibility of keeping the enslaved people alive. This was a big responsibility, and they were anxious to get to the other side with only a reasonable amount of loss. So if the enslaved people refused to eat by way of starving themselves to death, they would be flogged, or the crew would force feed them as a punishment. There are documented cases of the enslaved getting hold of knives and swords and guns and gunpowder, and if not using them against their captors, then they could use the weapons, or maybe tried to use the weapons, did use the weapons to end their own lives. If those enslaved could jump the ship as a means of escape, they would most certainly try. But the crew were wise to this, and so much netting prevented them from taking that deathly leap. Some who did manage would end up being recaught by smaller boats that would round them up. And in my book, Tapestries of Grief, I mention that sea animals such as sharks would circle the ships so that those who were enslaved would serve as nourishment to them through their desperation. But if they were willing to jump ship, then we might find that we have to ask, what actually is death? What is death? If they were willing to jump ship, if Cleopatra was willing to take the poison without fear, what actually is death? Although feared, we see throughout his story of events that death has been used to save people from major injustice, hardship, struggle, and woe. It has been used as a last attempt to take back control and dignity in hopeless situations. So if this is about personal power, surely death is a tool that can be wielded by the aggressor, but also the oppressed. Most recently, I've been intrigued by the case of Catherine Casanoff of Westchester County in New York. The mother of three announced that she was going to Switzerland to end her life by assisted suicide after being diagnosed with cancer for the third time. However, her fight and her might had also been diminished by her abusive husband and the court system of which he was so powerfully linked, because he is a lawyer. On May the 27th, Catherine took to Facebook and she said that it was with profound heartbreak that she hoped that no one else would have to experience that which she had experienced. She stated that she was ending her life because in the last 4 years of her life, she had woken up every day to the nightmare like no other. She said, "I can no longer endure the abuse and terror of Alan Kasanoff. I have also endured the emotional devastation of being without my children for so long." Now, I'm unsure of whether she lives or not, but one thing that I feel to be true is that she made the right decision for herself. We are living in a time when more and more people are ending their lives, and whilst the true figures are unclear, the fact of the matter is that lives are hard. Living is hard. It's complex, it's excruciating, and many are left feeling that their only way of hope or of peace is through this form of release. Catherine also cited the courts as a contributing factor toward her decision. And I'm reminded of an article that I read in The Guardian a while back that stated that 69 accounts of suicide have been linked to the Department of Work and Pensions. Furthermore, the DWP were accused of a cover-up in 2020 as they admitted actively destroying reports into people who have ended their lives after their benefits were stopped. This is before the pandemic and before the cost of living crisis. Whilst the act of taking one's own life is socially frowned upon, I think that more and more people are seeing it as a means of escape because of the desperate times that we are living in. And I am aware that institutions are training staff members to cope with an onslaught of whole family suicide situations where parents, or maybe even just one parent, decides to take everyone out because the stress of living is just too much. For this reason, I posted on LinkedIn last December about the pressures of Christmas and the advertising machine that encourages people to spend money and use credit streams to put smiles on their children's faces. But no one's smiling when someone decides to complete their life due to social pressures. When it comes to we, the people, we feel the loss when someone we love dies. When it is by decision, a decision that they have made, we find ourselves asking why we were not able to help them, why they were not able to come to us, or why they were not able to see life through a different lens. Ultimately, we cry for ourselves. We mourn for the fragile image of a reasonably okay life within which we reside. And when somebody makes that decision to end their life, we are drawn to look within. It is often at this point that guilt and regret can also diminish life. Now, I found myself in a unique position recently when someone that I was working with was visited by two policemen who were tasked with performing a welfare check. They were very thorough, empathic, and well-meaning. They searched their minds for something to say, and in their attempt to alleviate the situation, they suggested everything that they could think of for the person, from volunteering with equally vulnerable people to voluntary sectioning. As I said, they did all that they could in their power to suggest that life was worth living for the person that they were speaking to. And they didn't leave the location until they were assured that their remit was fulfilled. They were challenged in a very unique situation that was beyond their ability to comprehend. They were not equipped to support the person that I had visited on that day. I gave them a copy of my life's tapestry, of Tapestries of Grief. And I hope that they are able to use the book in the future for people that find themselves dealing with aspects of dying, death, and grief. When someone no longer wants to live, it is not a decision that's made on a whim. The will to live is very strong, and it's only when the thought and reasons for death are more overpowering than the will to live that one is able to override life. Okay? So it's only when the thought of death is more powerful than the will to live that somebody will be able to complete their life via suicide. Now, I speak from experience. I once attempted to end my own life. I was very young and I was struggling with my life within my family home and within the religion that I was raised in. My attempt, as you can see, was unsuccessful, but I was lambasted by my mother, who had lost a day's work. I was expected to just carry on, which I did. My family and my friends just didn't understand the reason why I had made that decision. It was a cry for help that never came. And as I look back, I did experience compassion from an unlikely source, my father. He was affected by what had happened, but he too was unable to facilitate or suggest any form of healing or conversation towards the reasons why I had made that decision. Now, let it be noted here today, I am not about to take my life, but I get it. I fully get it. Life is hard. And oftentimes, even I am left wondering, what is the point? Our free will is compromised. We are trapped in laws and acts and rights and orders that bind us. And we are plagued with past, present and future life woes, anxieties, pains and traumas, some of which are not even ours. I think that the problem is that we do not have a language or a foundation from which death in all aspects can be discussed openly and securely. We lack awareness of the purpose of death and what might happen after that transition has been made. We find ourselves in a void that is surrounded by walls that we cannot rationally penetrate. Because with every other problem, issue, or dilemma, there is another way. another thought, or another idea that can be followed, where death appears to be a final line. But let's say that death is a line. Let's call it the line in the sand. The line in the sand. Who put it there? Who has defined it? And what are the terms under which it is acceptable to cross over it? If the Egyptians and Romans and those enslaved were able to see death as some form of salvation, where did today's narrative come from that death, by whatever means, is a terrible thing? It is at this point that I would assert that we reside in a fear-based system that has been built against us. We are still cargo. We are all cargo. Regardless of your colour, belief system, background, or culture, your life is currency within a system. And within this system, there are laws in place to ensure that the system continues. Okay, so let's look at this differently. Let's say that we are all aboard a ship and that there are levels and decks and floors within which we reside. For example, a cruise ship can have between 12 and 16 levels. So we're talking big things here, all right? So we're all on this ship and we're all valued differently according to the level on which we reside, but we are all cargo. Who determines the value of each level? I don't know. I can guess. And by the end of this video, I hope that you'll be able to figure it out too. But our being on this ship justifies the need for the ship. We make the ship necessary, and we are documented, and those documents are worth money. So it is vital to the crew that we stay on the ship. I'm on the ship, you are on the ship, and when we look out to sea, we don't see any other ship but this one. The conditions are hard, and we all have to work, and the crew work to make sure that we abide by the rules. The crew, again, are understandably anxious. Any loss will fall back on them, and nobody wants to be seen as a failure to the owners of the ship. The owners of the ship are only to be feared. They have great power, but only because we are on the ship. Everyone on the ship is cargo. The senior crew are the officials that are steering the ship toward the final destination. They set the rules, and they have the lower members of crew who are less and less valued the lower down the pecking order they get. They have them doing the work. The ship has a clergy who make sure that we believe in the importance of the ship. And they provide us with horror stories about people who have stepped outside of the rules. We have teachers who show us how to abide by the rules. And we have police who keep us in line with the laws. If we break the rules whilst on the ship, we receive punishments. And we receive them from early on. A red cross, a detention, a smack, a fine, imprisonment, loss of freedom, loss of access to funds, and the list goes on. If we harm or end the value of other cargo, we are dealt with severely, especially if that cargo originates from higher levels. You're scandalized, those in your barrel are humiliated, and you are made an example of. I say barrel for want of a better word. But if we harm or end cargo that we consider to be our own within our barrel or on our deck, within our section, in our area, let's say, then we find ourselves in deep doo-doo, because even those who are closest to you will hate your guts. So to stay in place, we become crew. We stay on the right side of the line, and we teach our children to follow the rules and stay inside the ship. We encourage them to get to higher decks so that they can have a better experience, because obviously the higher we get, the better we are. And we don't know what the water holds for us. Sure, we've been splashed before. There have been storms and gales. It's scary, ugly, and perhaps cold. Sometimes the water is calm. And it does carry life. I mean, we're on a ship which is carried by the water. So we're safe as long as we stay on the ship. And we just don't know for sure what will happen if we're not on that ship. It might be better. There might be another ship. There might be other ships, but we just don't know for sure. So we opt to stay on this ship. Loss of cargo is a loss of money. There are allowances for natural loss. That would be the breakout of disease, accidents, age, and physical defects that occur from the start of the journey or over time. But you cannot willfully destroy the cargo. And that is why suicide is deemed illegal. It was condemned as a mortal sin in the eyes of the church, and it was made a crime under common law in England because that act reduced the monarch's purse. The act of suicide reduced the monarch's purse. This is why suicide is frowned upon. This is why death is feared, and why we are guided toward looking at it in worrisome ways. That's why we are guided to attempt all we can to stay alive, to keep going, to keep slaving. I often say that slavery didn't end. The parameters widened. We generate wealth for the crown. Whether we work or not, we are crew. We police ourselves as per the laws. We handle and we are handled. So by way of conclusion, I think it's a good idea to determine your line in the sand. Define it for yourself and see the relationship you have with those around you within the system that we all find ourselves in whilst here on earth. Yes, we experience hardships, but maybe there is another way. Maybe there is another ship. Maybe there are many other ships that we just can't see because our eyes are adjusted to the level on which we find ourselves on. Maybe the water is a door that we can use, but have just been scared away from. A bit like the bogeyman that keeps you in service to the higher echelons. As I've said, My name is Laura D. Pusey, and I started this video with a disclaimer, so I'm going to end it with the same disclaimer. I've been toying with this subject for a long, long time, and I understand and overstand that there are many people that would feel sensitive to this subject. And I recognize that my interpretation of what I see may not sit well with others. But my intention is for us to have discussions, open dialogue about what death is, what that line is, and what acceptable means we have in order to cross that line. I'm an investigator of death, and it is an ongoing discussion. My thoughts are my own, and they're not shared with the intention of swaying your thoughts or your actions or your deeds or those of other people. My thoughts are compounded by my observations from what I've seen, and I've been able to put a few things together in my mind since watching that series that was created about Cleopatra. I've been able to put sequences of events together through my investigation of the transatlantic slave trade, through which my ancestors were directly affected. Their DNA, their fear, their trauma, their problems, their worries, their issues, their injustices are held within my DNA. And so, although people would rather I didn't talk about the experience of enslavement, that as far as I'm concerned, I didn't personally experience, I have those trauma reactions within my body. And I am here on earth in this lifetime to clear that out of my system. Indeed, many of us have returned to earth to do that work. If you want to speak to me about anything that I have discussed in this video, you can contact me on 07975 861089. You can contact me through my website, Dipism, which is www.dipism.com, DIPISM. You can find me at FACFO. That's www.facfo.org. That's the Federation of African and Caribbean Funeral Operatives. And it is here where I am gathering the people who do the work that I do, so that when the time comes, we can facilitate the dying, the funeral, the deaths, and the grief of those who are experiencing death at that time. Thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Your comments are welcome. Bring it. It's all good. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. One love.